The first presentation of the series brings forth a subject which warrants examination prior to all others, in my opinion, that being communication and language. As stated in the introduction of this series, the Zeitgeist movement is in a communicative phase, focusing primarily on a shift in the dominant values which pervade our culture today. Until a critical mass occurs on this level, allowing for an economic model capable of delivering the liberal application of our current withheld capabilities in science and technology for human concern, we will unfortunately be engaging in mostly patchwork until then. We have to not just be the change we wish to see in the world, we also have to know why we need to change, what we need to change to, as well as how to do so. And if we are not communicating in the most effective way possible to initiate this change, then we are, I'm afraid, engaging on a fool's errand. Therefore, if we are not able to appreciate the limitations of language as well as the most effective use of it, then this communicative phase is clearly not going to go well, I'm afraid. As was stated in the opening to this series, Z-Day 2013 in London featured only exterior organisations. The first guest organisation I would like to highlight with regards to the subject of communication is the Centre for Non-Violent Communication. Please click on the link in the description for this video to watch Darren DeWitt's presentation on Z-Day, which should help to provide a background to non-violent communication before watching the following presentation. The title for the event between NVC and TZM following Z-Day was Using Language Consciously to Challenge, Connect and Create Change. But what sort of language, when, where, to challenge whom, and to create change in what? You may think I'm being deliberately picky by asking such questions, but isn't it often the case that we project into what someone says, divorcing ourselves from the context, time and place in which it was said, assuming to know what they meant, rather than inquiring further before jumping to conclusions? I for one know that I have, and very much still do. What can I say, other than learning is a lifelong process, not a destination? This sort of thing bothered one man by the name of Alfred Korzystki, who devised a system of communication known as general semantics, which will be detailed in this talk along with aspects of nonviolent communication in an attempt to display a method by which to create a more meaningful and peaceful dialogue between people and nations. Thus the title of this presentation is The Linguistics of Peace. Part 1. The Meaning of Meaning. Language is one of the key abilities which make us human. We're surrounded by words from birth. No other creature can communicate with such effectiveness. Unlike the rest of the animal kingdom, we can build on past knowledge, allowing for a continued emergence in our values and understandings. Language is clearly a major part of what it means to be human, as well as having a large influence on our patterns of thought and behaviour as well. When we have suppressed free inquiry and dialogue in the past, such as in the destruction of the Library of Alexandria, or the stagnation and despotism prevalent in the Dark Ages, we can see that mankind's progress has been hindered greatly. But what if there are certain blockades towards progress built into the structural dynamics of language itself? Blockades that we are perhaps not consciously aware of, and that may also close off our minds to new possibilities, or lead us to accept bogus propositions as being valid. Alfred Korzystki asked these sorts of questions from a slightly different angle. He asked, what was it that different people from different backgrounds could all agree on, and if this system by which they could all agree were abused, could this potentially lead to a great deal of confusion, misunderstanding and conflict? The basic principle of general semantics starts from the lowest common denominator possible in order to answer this question, that being the physical reality in which we exist. But even this may not start where we think it does. Remember that we once used to think there was nothing smaller than the visible. During the plague, for example, people were known to wash themselves in urine and eat crushed emeralds to ward off evil spirits, knowing nothing of the germs carrying the disease. In much the same way, the object you see and to which you attribute a word is a shortcut needed for the purpose of classification and may not be the best starting place to establish a more meaningful method of communication. So where do words start? Well, first there must be a stimulus, a happening of some sort that we detect. then a response to this stimulus. Very often without any thinking on a level of words. Words are then used to refer to this stimulus and center around an object, but the object is a non-verbal event. On the microscopic level, it's a mixture of atoms, then it's a hammer, then it's a tapping hammer, then it's a tool, then a business expense, and so on, until we are by now a very long way from the object or referent itself. This process is laid out in general semantics by something called the structural differential, which highlights the route towards the use of a word and on into abstraction. There is a space-time event known as the parabola, which describes the dance of electrons that collapse to become an object or event. There is an intuitive response on the non-verbal level to that stimulus, a correlation in our associative memory that we then name, which can leave out many of its characteristics in the process, implying that the word is the thing. From here we can make all sorts of further descriptions and inferences regarding the object, and by doing so move increasingly further away from the initial stimulus or physical referent itself. These higher order abstractions have plagued mankind, often with little or no meaningful conclusion. This is the realm of philosophy. Thinking that thinking is all you need to do to solve problems in the real world. But thinking uses words, and words are not reality. They are limited symbols of reference. What is life? There is none. There are living things at a given time in a given place, but no life that you can actually point to. What is good? There are good deeds dependent on the dictums of your surrounding culture, but no word good can be pointed to as a physical referent. What is love? It's something different depending on how you've encountered the word through your experience. What is truth? There's no such thing. It is emergent upon our increased understanding of the world and its functions, and is subject to change. It's been said that philosophy is something that takes place in between meals. Or to put it another way, some people look at what is and wonder why. Some people consider what is not and wonder why not. And the rest of us have to go to work and don't have time to think about that shit. This is not an attempt to discredit philosophy outright, as it of course has its place in terms of questioning reality, fostering creative thinking, and looking at ways of making communication more dependable, but it must also be accredited for its contribution to culture lag. Take Aristotle, one of the philosophic giants and father of formal logic. The word logic comes from logos, which is Greek for word. This should tell you something of where the philosopher's problems get started, for he deals with words rather than things. The rules of formal logic instituted by Aristotle are as follows. 1. The law of identity. A is A, so a pig is a pig. 2. The law of the excluded middle. Everything is either A or not A, so it's either a pig or it's not a pig. And 3. The law of contradiction. Nothing is both A and not A, so nothing is both a pig and not a pig. For the symbol A we have in our heads, this makes sense perhaps. But the minute we substitute this symbol for a living, breathing, grunting animal we refer to as a pig, the laws collapse. What type of pig? When? Where? The label pig may always stay the same in your head, but this is not the case in the ever-changing state of the real world. We should know what type of pig to which we are referring, where it is, and at what time, or else we may well end up with a bacon sandwich, when what we really wanted was a cute little pet piglet. The law of the excluded middle would surely rule out findings such as the common ancestry found in evolution, would it not? For if a man is a man, then how could he have ever shared common ancestry with an ape? The law of the excluded middle, be as it may, would also have you believe that something is either a plant, animal, or a mineral, as we used to think. If this is so, then why is it that the unicellular organism of the euglena functions both as a plant in sunlight and an animal in darkness? Scientists studying this organism must stay loyal to what is observed, rather than to words in their heads, coming up with a new type of classification for this organism, the protists. The ultimate showdown between formal logic and the scientific method came in 1589 when Galileo Galilei performed an experiment to show that the Aristotelian notion that heavier objects fall to Earth faster than light ones was false. He proposed that objects fall at the same speed and that it was air resistance that caused them to fall at different rates. But Galileo was not satisfied to just think it to be true. He put it to the test. So as legend has it, a wooden ball and a cannonball of the same size but 10 times different in weight were dropped from the Leaning Tower of Pisa to prove Galileo's theory, and as they hit the ground simultaneously in front of his doubters, the modern era of the scientific method was born. And he would like to think that that was that. But alas, we humans seemingly love to fight facts if they challenge our deeply cherished identities, opinions, and dogmatic beliefs. So when Galileo pointed his telescope towards the heavens to discover moons to be circling Jupiter, confirming Copernicus's theory of a heliocentric solar system of which the Sun was the centre and not the Earth, this contradicted the view of the Catholic Church, which decreed him to be a heretic and had him put under house arrest for the remaining 20 years of his life. These observations showed well over 400 years ago that our thoughts and beliefs are not necessarily to be trusted, and although we have made great progress in arriving at many new understandings since then, we still seem to be suffering from a major egotistical hangover. These examples should serve to illustrate the need to make an accurate description of what is observed in physical reality after the event, and not to hold to any supposed eternal truths we may have via associations with words rolling around in our head. Alas, old habits die hard, often with dire consequences. As much credence is still given to the outdated and untested philosophical dispositions that continue to permeate our culture today, with many attributing the plight of the poor to human nature, or survival of the fittest at work, and thus completely natural and acceptable. This is a rather thinly veiled reference to the by now thoroughly debunked notion of social Darwinism, and the hugely misunderstood phrase survival of the fittest, which is not an accurate scientific description of natural selection, and precisely why educated biologists do not use the term, for it implies that natural selection is simply survival of the physically strongest or most competitive. This is, however, not always the case, as collaboration clearly plays a huge role in the process of natural selection. The correct wording would actually be survival of the fit enough. That is, the organism which is most suited to adapt to changes in its environment, passing on its genes to the next generation. There is a whole range of attributes that a species must display under different circumstances in order to be an evolutionary success. This is why humans have become the masters of survival, as we possess the capacity for competition or collaboration, violence or peaceful resolution, and empathy or apathy, depending on what our surrounding environment dictates. Studies now show that if you live in a society that has a higher level of income inequality, then you are more likely to be susceptible to higher levels of stress, depression, obesity, teenage pregnancy, and lower levels of social trust, to name but a few, showcasing the effect that this sort of social arrangement has on actual people living out their everyday lives in the real world. Think of the abstractions of a more political flavour: freedom, the war on terror, democracy, socialism, fascism, communism. Think of the horrors committed in the name of these verbal phantoms. What capitalism? Where? When? The capitalism of 1921 in America, or of 1870 England? Do we actually mean the same thing when we talk about capitalism or socialism? I doubt it. It also doesn't matter if you throw the dictionary definition at someone if there is no referent for the word being used. And even if there were, then not only does it not necessarily say all there is to say about the object in question, but we will all have a different association with the word depending on the context, time and place in which we encountered it, so you are still very often no closer to having a meaningful or constructive dialogue. This can fall into something in general semantics called time binding. To call an apple from today an apple does not help to describe the apple of yesterday or December last year. We fix the object in a time at the point we use the word, but the word is not the thing, nor is it an accurate description of it with no fixation in time, context, or place. Perhaps all that can be said about the apple never will be. Perhaps there will always be more to know, so calling it just an apple could well close off our minds to the complexity of its journey from seed to apple to decay, and all of its many molecular components and mechanistic relationships entailed within it. So the dictionary definition not only does not help in this regard, but in some cases it can actually make getting to what the speaker means when they use the words they used even harder, as they are now condemned for not carrying the Oxford English Dictionary around in their head, or perhaps they have committed the ultimate of all online debating sins, the typo. Because spelling the word incorrectly clearly means the point you are making is invalid. So for those who sit on their intellectualized fence to ridicule the masses for their stupidity are often on a very shaky perch indeed, for they often deal with more higher order abstractions in conversation. Saying the room is in a state of rapid oxidation in the exothermic chemical process of combustion may make you sound clever, but holy shit, the house is on fire will probably lead to putting out the flames just a tad quicker. Just as knowing the name of every plant or insect may serve you well in a pub quiz, but it doesn't mean you can actually perform a study of any validity on the plant or insect in question. You just possess a load of symbols in your head. So we tend to talk at each other and not to each other. The speaker assumes that the listener has the same correlations in their head for the words he or she is using, and by doing so, they perhaps put the emphasis in the wrong place. The meaning should not be attributed to the word, because words have no meaning. Speakers do, in accordance to their associative memory that they have with the words being used by them at the time. There are many frivolous examples of this sort of cross-communication, but here is one of a more tragic nature, given in an excerpt from Strong Constitutions by Maxwell A. Cameron. At an inter-party communist meeting on December 20th, 1917 in Soviet Russia, Lenin passed a note, as he often did during party meetings, to the recently appointed head of the Soviet secret police, Felix Dzerzhinsky, asking how many vicious counter-revolutionaries were in their jails. Dzerzhinsky handed the note back, stating the number to be approximately 1,500. Lenin shrugged and put a cross on the note. Apparently he did this often to indicate that he had read it. Dzerzhinsky, however, took the cross as a collective death sentence and ordered the execution of all 1,500 men that same night. A cross can mean many things: a signature of a mystery man, a sign of affection at the end of a letter, or X marks the spot on a treasure map. But Dzerzhinsky took it as a death sentence, and 1,500 people met their demise. This is the sort of thing that can happen when we assume to know what someone means, rather than inquiring into what the words they used meant when they used them. Assumption of meaning through association of word with thing, along with time binding, can easily lead to the formulation of fixed views that exclude differences, highlighting only similarities, serving to create a great deal of prejudice and hostility amongst people and nations. For example, just because a member of one particular social, racial, or ethnic group did something you don't like, does not mean that all members of that group are like that. If you ask someone to describe Hitler, you may well find him described as a tyrannical dictator rather than as an artist and vegetarian. It is this limited description that ensues that this is all this person ever was or ever will be. It can easily serve to cast them eternally with either credulity or disdain. In this statement, there is another interesting observation that could be made, because perhaps the next thing you may feel the need to do in conversation after making such a statement regarding Hitler would be to state that you are not saying you appreciate his actions in the Second World War, which really only bolsters the point I am making with regards to our tendency to very often think in absolutes. If I say I think society should be based on sharing, then I may be cast as a communist. If I say that I'm not conservative, then I must be Labour. And if I point out some of the less maniacal behaviours of Adolf Hitler, then perhaps I could be called a Nazi-loving fascist. A Frenchman screws your wife. Another tries to con you. and another serves you at a restaurant with a look of indifference. Then you meet one who wants to buy you lunch, and you can't help but wonder whether they're going to do a runner, leaving you to foot the bill. It's easy to see how these experiences can be associated with the higher order abstraction of Frenchmen to create a prejudice against all the individuals who live in the territory marked out long ago known as France. This tendency to discriminate against everything you choose to associate with a word is perhaps more commonplace than simple racism or prejudice. Take hot and cold, for example. Here we have 3 beakers of water, A, B and C, each containing water with a different temperature, indicated on those cups. We put our left hand in A and our right hand in C. We move our right hand from C to B and we say, this water is cold. We move our left hand from A into B and we say, this water is warm. What does this make B? Warm or cold? Neither. It makes it 65. But whilst we've been talking, that temperature has of course changed. The same can be said for right, wrong, good and evil, naughty or nice. They do not exist other than inside our heads. How many times have you heard someone say, I'm a failure, or nothing ever goes right for me, or I'm a horrible person, as though this is how they have always been and always will be? Think of the depression, suicides and subsequent anguish caused by such all-encompassing use of absolutes in our thinking. Politics is rife with the use of all-encompassing higher-order abstractions. Perhaps nowhere does this show its destructive power more than in the use of euphemisms. What sounds nicer, collateral damage or the bombing, maiming and killing of women and children? I know which one I would use if my army had just firebombed a village or town we were supposedly liberating. Besides, why not use nice-sounding language to cover up a nasty thing? After all, war is good business, so you can spout all the anti-war rhetoric you like, but a system does what it produces, not what we want it to with mere words and sentiment. In the real world, humanity spends every 8 days on war what it would cost to feed all the starving people on this planet for a year. Part 2. A language of scarcity. We grew as a species from times of great hardship and scarcity. Such pressures led us from nomad to settler, forager to farmer, and rather than fight over such scarcity, we would often seek to trade with other tribes instead. From the need to manage the increasing complexity of human society and the inherent inefficiency of barter, we began to develop a new tool of abstraction to express the collective perceived value of trade, money, which has become the method by which human society now operates. The foundational premise of its economic operations is price. This price is arrived at through the actual or perceived scarcity or abundance inherent to the good or service in question at the time of transaction, and should attempt to accurately reflect the actual amount of goods and services available in an economy in an attempt to meet the needs of its human population. At the heart of this process is the requirement that scarcity and inefficiency of some sort exists in order for more money to need to be brought into circulation to pay people to service these issues, in turn servicing them with money through their submission to labour in order to meet their life needs. In the grand scale of the global market, this is translated into the measure of health being consumption. For if there's no consumption, there is no money being circulated, no growth, and a loss of jobs. So let me get this straight. The fundamental premise of our so-called economy, which is supposed to be economizing, is growth and the preservation of inefficiency and scarcity of some sort to maintain employment regardless of the social utility of this employment? With a fundamental economic premise like this, is it any wonder that we will need 2 Earths by 2030 to keep on our current rates of consumption? That the last remaining rainforest could be consumed in less than 40 years? That species are going extinct at roughly 1,000 times their normal rate due to human activity? That over 70% of the world's fish species are disappearing at an alarming rate due to overfishing, and that 99% of the materials used in the process of manufacturing for the goods on sale ends up as waste within 6 weeks? Once again, a system is what it does, not what we want it to do, and forgive me, but a few low-energy light bulbs and recycling your cardboard does not look like it's going to solve these problems anytime soon. Monetary and banking policy is obviously a crucial factor in the controlling of prices, and the system of money creation which fits this purpose of growth perfectly is called fractional reserve banking, and is the predominant process of money creation across this planet. Contrary to popular opinion, this process is not controlled by governments, as it has been at various points in history, but by private banks for private gain. Money is created out of debt with interest applied by private banks. Interest that can never be repaid, for it didn't exist in the original loan to begin with, which means that even if we were to pay back all this debt to the banks that created it tomorrow, we would still owe the interest. So the only way to keep up repayments is by creating more money through loans, which means still more debt at more interest. So naturally, debt in the global economy has been steadily increasing everywhere this practice has been implemented, and has especially skyrocketed since it was taken off the pseudo-empirical physically referented restraint of gold in the 1970s. This has given money-lending institutions the power to loan money in a general climate of pressure and scarcity, pushing more people into debt and working more in an era when we have consistently been producing more with less, through increased mechanisation of production. So whilst logically, given this ephemeralization, a term coined by industrial engineer Buckminster Fuller which encapsulates the notion of doing more with less, we should all be working less, we are in actual fact working more by chasing around phantom interest to repay loans to institutions that never had the money to lend in the first place. This phantom interest and debt-based monetary system shows that scarcity is in fact built right into the heart of the process of money creation itself, guaranteeing bankruptcy, inflation, and inequality as a mathematical certainty, and forcing us to compete with each other for market share. The underpinning of scarcity breeds a competitive mentality, and in competition and gaming strategy, anything goes, as well as who gets to create the money supply. So of course, the banks and financial elite have sought to infiltrate and control the process of money creation since their inception. It gives them a strategic advantage, maintaining a steady flow of monetary wealth from the bottom of the financial food chain to the top. And this is why 1% of humanity now owns 46% of the world's wealth, instead of 40% as it has been in recent years. 80% live on less than $10 a day, 50% on less than $3, and a sixth of this planet's human population are starving to death on less than $1.25 a day. So the idea that earning lots of money and paying your taxes is some meaningful sort of social contribution is clearly absurd when this is what our economic system produces. One of the top money-generating enterprises on this planet is in the arena of financial trading, a practice based on an abstraction called debt which creates no life-sustaining goods or services for anyone, just money to more money for money possessors. But money is not the thing we need. You can't eat it or put it in your car to make it go. Money goes where money demand takes it, and money demand now demands more money, ad infinitum. This is not what the initial founders of free market principles intended, stating clear stipulations such as the need to mix your labour with your produce, leaving enough for others, and not letting goods spoil or go to waste. Once again though, systems produce what they produce, and not what we demand them to produce through paper proclamations or political decrees. And these provisos did not take into account the tacit value placed upon money as a means of exchange, making it into a form of abstract property in and of itself, in turn cancelling out every one of these stipulations. Money possessors and their labour are now far removed from the mode of production or any physical referent, and through the monopolisation of this process of money creation, they have now been able to accrue massive volumes of wealth and in turn the power to control industry, government and public opinion. Public opinion is a good place to see this consolidation take place, with the biggest 6 news and entertainment corporations now controlling 90% of the media in America as of 2011, whereas it used to be 50 in 1983. According to these outlets, the news that agencies of the United States government were found guilty of the murder of Martin Luther King in an American civil trial in 1999 is apparently not news worth mentioning. Hopefully, this sort of monopolization of information should help to illuminate the danger of having the ability to dominate the information the public gets to see or hear in so few hands. But there are a couple of blind sides to what seems like a perfect storm. Firstly is the internet, which we have seen attempt to be curtailed in its dissemination of open access to information to the population by the powers that be, through acts such as SOPA and PIPA, for the rebellious threat that it poses to establishment interests. An interesting example of just how much the power establishment's cage is rattled by this open access to and spreading of information has come to light through the recent revelations from the NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden regarding a group known as JTRIG, which stands for Joint Threat Research Intelligence Group. This is a unit of the British intelligence group, the General Communications Headquarters in the UK. Targets for this dirty tricks campaign range from Iran and the Taliban to journalists and the hacktivist group Anonymous. The agency's goal was stated in these leaked materials to destroy, deny, degrade and disrupt enemies by discrediting them and planting misinformation to shut down their communications. A criticism sometimes levied at the movement and other online activists is the term armchair activists or slacktivists, because spreading information is not supposedly doing anything to help their cause. If this is true, then why are JTRIG targeting such groups? It seems to me that the armchair can be an extremely important place in terms of activism in not just my view, but of those in power as well. If we observe the trend of increasing public access to information historically, then we can see why the power establishment are absolutely right to be just a little bit paranoid about the internet. Because every step that has been made towards a wider scope of interaction and access to information has brought with it a threat to the establishment's power structure. Whether it is in the teaching of reading and writing, through the advent of the public printing press in the era of the Enlightenment and the Renaissance, which helped to challenge the notion of the divine right of kings, or the advent of the car, plane, train, telephone and television in the late 19th and early 20th century, which helped to give people the means to communicate and congregate over large distances, bringing about a century which saw the greatest volume of social changes than ever before, illegitimate authority is clearly quite right to be concerned about the shaky perch they occupy. The internet is the next step in this trend if we choose to use it. We can come together like never before and share information in an open source way and in a global public sphere, as you are doing so right now by watching this video. Sharing our findings and workings with others to challenge these top-down hierarchical systems. Another blind side to this entire structure relies on maintaining employment to feed both the debt repayment cycle as well as the drive for increased consumption. But with the exponential increase in technological advancement, companies are seeking to turn toward automation as soon as it's cost-effective to do so, in order to cut costs and maintain a competitive edge in the marketplace. This has come to be known as technological unemployment, and is hardly ever mentioned in the mainstream media, but it is in fact historically the largest threat to jobs. Whereas people were once able to relocate and retrain to keep pace with this trend, finding new emergent sectors in the workplace, it is now reaching a critical point with regards to racing ahead of our capacity to catch up, with a recent estimate in a study by Oxford University stating that up to 46% of the current jobs will be gone or under serious threat in the next 10 to 20 years in America. So rather than having people watching people who are watching the machines do the work, why not see a move to full unemployment as quickly as possible as a positive thing? Surely, in a sane, physically referented, sustainable and efficient social operating system designed to meet human need from the outset, such a thing would essentially mean that we are increasing the automation of dangerous and monotonous labour, helping to create an access abundance and increasing our overall industrial efficiency, would it not? After all, is this not why we invented technology to begin with? To make life easier? An economy which deliberately seeks to move away from age-old notions such as you must earn your living by the sweat of your brow sounds okay to me. You get a job so you can afford to have a life, but then you spend all your time at work and end up with no time to live the life you're working for. Any questions? Sounds like a pretty rubbish deal to me. And the reason why it sounds that way is because it is. With 80% of people now saying that they hate their job, with an ever-increasing amount of those jobs serving no meaningful social purpose for human well-being anyway. I would much rather welcome children to this planet with a "Hello, welcome to Earth. Your needs are provided for. Please do chip in where you can and in what interests you." Instead of "Hi, find a job to earn your right to live." Because even though we have an awesome technological capability handed down to us from prior generations that could easily support you and everyone else on this planet and many, many more, we think that you should earn your right to exist by contributing to a system that produces inequality, poverty, destitution, waste, and war. If you are concerned about people doing their fair share for society and pulling their own weight via jobs and taxes, then firstly you would need to justify the efficacy of our current waste and war-producing socio-economic paradigm, providing evidence to show that the profit motive is a decent incentive system by which to get people to do their fair share for such a system, would you not? Perhaps at least this second point is valid. Surely, we need money to motivate people to come up with new ideas and make a contribution to society, or else they will just turn into fat, lazy blobs who expect everyone else to do the work, right? Actually, wrong. Because when this commonly held cultural assumption is held up to the spotlight of factual-based evidence and research, it is found to be precisely the opposite. Multiple studies now show that if you want people to increase their productivity in back-breaking monotonous labour, that, as mentioned, is no longer relevant because it can now be done by machines, then more money absolutely helps with more output. However, if you want them to be enthusiastic, creative, contributing collaborators to problem solving, and think outside the box, then money does not only not help in this goal, it is in fact detrimental to it. Along with the studies detailed in these books, it is interesting to note that more patents are filed in more financially equal countries, all of which show that when you have one eye on the competition, grade, or monetary reward, you lose focus on the task in hand. So if you want to increase invention and creativity in your economy, then money is actually the worst way you can do it. Jobs no longer need to be the foundation of society, as we now have the technological capability to create an access abundance for the entire human population with very little need for human involvement at all, rendering the technical need for money as a tool to represent scarcity, and so in turn the entire labour for income gain. It is not a case of just ending all jobs tomorrow by passing a law to outlaw them. It is about embracing the automation of jobs for the efficiency it brings instead of fighting it in favour of inefficiency to preserve profit in a game that is creating environmental destruction, poverty, increasing income disparity, and war. Just as many of the great philosophers throughout history thought to question the value of higher order abstractions such as good, truth, love, or reason, they seemed able to accept slavery as a morally sound position. History is once again repeating itself, it seems, with a culture conditioned by scarcity. The difference between slaves and wage slaves is that you lock one up and the other one does it for themselves. Let the machines do the work, and then you don't have to get wound up the way I used to about benefit cheats stealing your taxes, because in such a system there would be no state to pay taxes to, as they too can be rendered obsolete. What is a government for? To fill in the gaps in a market system that cannot or will not fulfill all areas of social function, playing referee in that same competitive system and papering over the cracks of social problems caused by the stress created by the market system through setting laws to deal with a problem they either do not know how or are unwilling to solve. So if for argument's sake we could create a collaborative, interactive, open source society based on producing goods to be updated and recyclable from the outset, standardizing where possible to restrict waste, and orientate our social system towards strategic access, efficiency protocols, and the drive to educate people to be creative problem solvers of the root cause of social problems, then why do we need a government setting laws? Such a system may seem unrealistic and utopian from our current culturally backward vantage point, but it is our current so-called economic system that should be bestowed with the title of unrealistic and utopian, as it professes that infinite growth on a finite planet is somehow a measure of social health, while simultaneously declaring that we are wasting our resources and need to be more conservative in our use of them. It's like a fox giving a lecture on chickens' rights. So the choice is clear. We can have a system that is geared towards preserving our planet's finite resources and meeting human need by providing an access abundance for all with as close a correlation to the environment we need to survive as possible, or we can continue to use our scarcity-orientated ownership restrictive model based on little more than an abstraction, in which, for example, even with our current woefully inadequate and inefficient food production methods, we could feed the billion members of our human family currently starving to death with less than 25% of what the US and Europe throw away in food each year alone. It is not a resource problem we have. It is a production and distribution problem, and the operating and governing structure of all of the dynamics of our socio-economic paradigm is money. An abstraction tied to no physically referented decision-making process at all, and at the heart of all of the issues we now need to solve. Like business, politics, religion, and philosophy, money is not a scientific process, and neither is so-called modern economics. If we truly want a brotherhood of man, then we must remove all the artificial boundaries that separate people, not by passing laws to paper over the cracks of the issue at hand or by electing this or that particular leader or political party, but by addressing the actual reason behind the inefficiency or scarcity that exists to require the need to service that problem with money in the first place, rendering money a once useful social tool to where it now deserves to be, obsolete. For such a transition in human life to occur, we will need collaboration on a global scale, taking all known interacting factors into account. For this, we will therefore need an adequate system of communication. This is where general semantics and non-violent communication could play an important role. Through inquiring into what people actually mean instead of assuming to know, and listening to the feelings and needs of people rather than initiating blame and punishment, and by looking for a physical referent for our language wherever possible, then people from different cultures, beliefs and backgrounds can come to an agreement based around working towards their common needs, and the claims I am making are therefore not fanciful, but in fact completely possible. We can live in a world without poverty and war if that's what we want. The only limitation on human potential are the laws of nature, to which all are a part of and all must adhere. Just because things have been a certain way for a long time does not mean that they have to be that way forever. Everything has always and always will change. If humanity can learn to embrace this change and anchor their thinking in the real world, using the most fantastic part of being human, that being language, more wisely to communicate constructively and meaningfully to our fellow man, then I see no reason why we cannot come together as one human family and meet the needs of every one of its members. And in the words of Bill Hicks, we can explore space, both inner and outer, forever in peace. That last statement may sound like something from the time of the hippie movement in the 60s, but sentiment and protest were the tools of that movement, and they are not the answer. You have to have a technical plan to eradicate the conditions that reinforce the propensity for poverty, war, debt and servitude, and the difference is that we now can finally implement such a system to do just this, which brings us on to part 3, the linguistics of peace. The system to which I refer could be called a natural law resource-based economy, or NLRBE for short, the definition of which is the application of the scientific method for social concern. If we do not have an alternative economic model rooted in the best decision-making process we have ever come to know of, applied to the natural world in which we exist, then we are condemned to repeat past errors and misunderstandings over and over again. It is not the business of this presentation to go through the tenets of NLRBE in general, as it's been gone through in many of the other movement materials. Suggested viewing materials would be the documentaries Zeitgeist Addendum and Zeitgeist Moving Forward, the lectures Where Are We Now and Where Are We Going, and Economic Calculation in an NLRBE, or the movement's fully sourced outline of the efficacy of this economic model, the Zeitgeist Movement Defined. However, it is worth noting for the purpose of context of this presentation that the levels of efficiency that could be produced by such a system were we to eradicate the technical need for the use of a monetary system in the running of society are simply staggering. Whether it is clean and renewable maglev train systems that can travel at speeds of up to 4,000 miles per hour safely and using just 2% the energy of planes, or the hundreds of times more efficient, sustainable and healthy food production that can be achieved through the use of hydroponics, vertical farming and permaculture, it's easy to see that the archaic, abstract, outdated and immature system that we are using has to go if we are serious about addressing these problems. And to do this, we need to use language in a way that is less prone to creating hostility and misunderstanding, and one that is fit for creating a collaborative and sustainable planet. I, for one, am fed up with waiting for the next politician who is untrained in the area he or she is supposedly supposed to be dealing with to change things inside a system that doesn't work in the first place. Or the next pop star to tell us, usually from their ivory towers, how we should all just love one another and not care so much about the money. Or maybe how if we all just give to charity then it will all come good in the end, when it should be obvious that charity itself is the most blatant evidence possible of a failed system. Surely, if it did what it said on the label and met human need, then why do we need charity? I am tired of words, promises and paper proclamations. I am tired of all my dealings with my fellow human family being based upon how many pieces of paper one of us has loaned to us by the bank that never had the money to lend to us in the first place. I want a system that works. Period. Not one that says it will if everyone sticks to the rules. I want a system whose internal mechanisms are designed in such a way so that such negative social conditions depreciate over time rather than increase. Not one based on opinion and ego in which if you have more shiny golden coins, then you can own as much of this planet as you like. People often ask the question of who would make the decisions and control the distribution of resources in an LRBE, and the answer is that we would arrive at decisions via the scientific method rather than making them. This can seem extremely alien through the lens of our current conditioned values, so here's an example to help understand this idea. Take a plot of land. 4 families live on the plot of land and they decide to plant a fruit tree for food. Which one of these positions is the best place to plant the tree? A, B, C or D? You'd think B, right? Well, in this figurative example at least, it's actually D. You see, the scientific method states that you have to take into account all the known variables that interact on the tree's ability to produce a high amount of food. So that's the pH level of the soil, the best place for irrigation, sunlight and so on. You can decide the best form of distribution in much the same way. It's not based on the biased opinion of a leader or politician, but instead uses a method of decision-making based on objective tests, critical thought and empirical logic, and be updated upon new findings. It's self-evident, based on a ground-up understanding and not a matter of subjective and flawed human opinion or ego, as many of our social decision-making methods currently are. Besides, who makes the decisions in a price system? For example, what is stopping me having 500,000 sports cars if I have enough money? Elton John fills up all 5 of his houses in the UK with fresh flowers every week. How many Elton Johns are there to live in these houses? Is this the freedom we want? The freedom to consume and hoard as much of this planet as we possibly can before we die, depriving current and future generations to the means of life in the process? We do not live on an infinite planet, so we cannot go on with the childish notion of thinking that we can all live with infinite wants. Not everyone has to have the same as everyone else in an NLRBE, as with the inefficiency inherent to that of communism. But we can at least streamline production and access in such a way so that everyone on this planet can have a far higher standard of living than they could have ever conceived possible in our current scarcity-orientated, competitive ownership-based monetary market system. To make a transition of this magnitude, we must shift our values that keep the current social status quo in order. This requires a massive communication campaign to help communicate a new direction in which we could head as a species. Whilst we should of course be nullifying our reliance on this system wherever possible, be careful of who we bank with and what we consume without communicating a new train of thought to which to orientate people's values and intentions, we should expect to see much of the same thing, for we will be engaging in little more than patchwork to a system that is no longer fit for purpose. Meaningful communication has never been so important, and the time to use our words more wisely, whatever wisdom means, is now. So for anyone who wishes to engage in the act of communicating this train of thought, I can think of nothing more important to study initially than these topics. Here are a few suggestions within the realm of general semantics for how we may go about using language in the transition to an NLRBE. 1. Mathematics to be used wherever possible to describe physical events. 2. Avoid identification of word with thing. Is should be handled like a hot potato. Think of the phrase, he is a bad boy. When was he a bad boy? Where did he do the bad thing? What did he do exactly? This is the use of the when, where, what line of thinking. 3. Higher order abstractions should be used cautiously and consciously, and we would do well to know what level of abstraction they are on. 4. Use of the structural differential to help clear up our understanding of what level of abstraction we are dealing with. 5. Tie in education to physical reference instead of filling kids' heads with meaningless symbols. And 6. Try to delay a conclusion until you possess all the facts possible. The phrase, I don't know, should be cherished as an opportunity for personal and social growth rather than seen as a weakness to be punished. Some suggested reading material to learn more about general semantics would be The Tyranny of Words by Stuart Chase and Science and Sanity by Alfred Korzybski. I would also recommend checking out the Institute of General Semantics, as well as a 6-part lecture series by Irvin Lee on the subject, which is available on YouTube. It is some excerpts from The Tyranny of Words that I would like to use to sum up what this method can do for us in helping to create a more peaceful and relational dialogue amongst humanity. Modern physics has rung down the curtain on absolutes. Scientists now devote themselves more to cutting into the margin of the unknown than to framing eternal laws. The semantic discipline has a kindred aim. It is not an absolute, but only a useful method for cutting into the margin of opaque language, making communication clearer. It cannot clear up all talk. There are blind spots. Presently, on these foundations, someone will come along and give the study another push forward, progressively narrowing the margin of the unknown. What the semantic discipline does is to blow ghosts out of the picture and create a new picture as close to reality as one can get. One is no longer dogmatic, emotional, bursting with the rights and wrongs of it, but humble, careful, and aware of the very considerable number of things he does not know. His map may be wrong, his judgment may err, but the probability of better judgment is greatly improved, for he is now swayed more by happenings in the outside world than by reverberations in his skull. The promise of the semantic discipline lies in broadening the base of agreement. Under the going canons of philosophy, theology, and the rest, there is no possibility of wide agreement. Referents are too few. Good language alone will not save mankind, but seeing the things behind the names will help us to understand the structure of the world we live in. Good language will help us to communicate with one another about the realities of our environment, where now we speak darkly in alien tongues. In conclusion, for a long time now, the world's religious leaders, philosophers, and writers have been proposing notions of how the world can become a more peaceful, happy, and joyful place in which for us all to live. But the ability to technically achieve the abundance required for such a globally collaborative system was never a reality until now. We've achieved so much as a species, and to our knowledge are the greatest evolutionary success story this universe has ever created. Quite simply, we are amazing, and together there is nothing we can't do. We've changed before, and we can do it again, but not without effort. So I'm afraid the first change has to start with you, not someone else. In the final analysis, we are one people, and we share one planet.